The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and decay. Ethan Marshall stood at the edge of Hollow Hill, his heart pounding in his chest. The letter in his hand trembled as he read the words for the 100th time. Come to the house on Hollow Hill. The answers you seek are within. Ethan had received the letter 3 days ago, delivered with no return address, no indication of its sender. The neat, typed letters offered no clues, but the words haunted him, compelling him to return to the place where his sister had disappeared 6 months earlier. He wasn't the only one drawn to the house that night. Ava Sinclair stared up at the darkened silhouette of the mansion, her fingers tightening around the silver pendant that hung from her neck. Her dreams had been filled with visions of this place, visions of death and despair. The letter she received only confirmed what she already knew. The house held the key to her salvation or her doom. Dr. James Avery parked his car a short distance away, his expression unreadable as he approached the others. He too had received a letter, though his reasons for coming were more complex than he cared to admit. He had spent years running from the truth, but tonight the truth would find him. Maya Rodriguez adjusted the strap of her camera, her excitement barely contained. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to document the paranormal activity that had made Hollow Hill infamous. She didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but the thrill of the unknown was too tempting to resist. Victor Kane arrived last, his jaw clenched as he stared at the house. The letter had awakened something in him, something dark and violent that he had fought to bury for years. But there was no escaping it now. The house on Hollow Hill was calling him, and he knew he had to answer. As the storm rolled in, the 5 strangers exchanged wary glances, each of them feeling the weight of the night ahead. They didn't know each other, but they shared a common goal: to uncover the secrets of the house and to survive the night. Little did they know, the house had other plans. The gathering storm. The sky had turned a menacing shade of gray as the group stood at the base of Hollow Hill. The wind had picked up, whipping through the trees and carrying the first droplets of rain. The house loomed above them, its dark windows like empty eyes staring down at them. We should head inside before the storm gets worse, Ethan suggested, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. He glanced at the others, each lost in their own thoughts. They didn't know what awaited them inside, but standing out here wasn't an option. Ava nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the darkness. She clutched her pendant tightly, drawing strength from the cool metal against her skin. Maya, ever the adventurer, was the first to step forward. "Let's do this," she said, her camera already rolling. "I want to get some shots before the light completely fades." Victor followed close behind, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. He had the look of a man prepared for battle, though the enemy was far more insidious than anything he had faced before. Dr. Avery lingered at the back, his eyes narrowing as he studied the house. There was something familiar about the place, something that tugged at the edges of his memory. But before he could dwell on it, the sky opened up, sending a torrential downpour crashing down on them. "Inside now," Ethan shouted, leading the way up the steps to the front door. The group hurried after him, their footsteps heavy on the wooden porch. The door creaked open at Ethan's touch, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell of damp wood and decay filled their nostrils as they stepped inside, the storm's fury muffled by the thick walls of the house. The house on Hollow Hill. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, making them all jump. The air inside the house was thick with dust, and the only light came from the faint glow of Maya's camera. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked under their weight. "Everyone stick together," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "We don't know what we're dealing with." The group nodded in agreement, their eyes scanning the room. There was an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder outside. Victor moved toward the staircase, his hand resting on the banister. "We should check upstairs, see if there's anything, or anyone, up there." Ava hesitated, her instincts warning her against splitting up. But she knew they had to explore the house if they were going to uncover its secrets. "I'll stay down here with Maya," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We can start searching the first floor. Ethan and Dr. Avery nodded, following Victor up the stairs. The wood groaned beneath their feet, a sound amplified by the stillness of the house. As they ascended, the air grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Downstairs, Ava and Maya moved cautiously through the darkened hallways. The house was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and closed doors, each leading to rooms that felt trapped in time. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings, and the faded furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. Maya kept her camera rolling, capturing every eerie detail. "This place is amazing," she whispered, her excitement palpable. "Can you imagine the stories these walls could tell?" Ava didn't respond. Her focus was on the atmosphere around them, the strange energy that seemed to pulse through the very walls. She could feel the house watching them, its presence growing stronger with every step they took. As they entered what appeared to be a living room, Ava froze. The room was disturbingly untouched by time. No dust, no decay. The furniture was perfectly arranged, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "What the hell?" Maya muttered, lowering her camera. "This wasn't here a minute ago." Ava's heart raced as she reached for the pendant around her neck. "We're not alone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The house, it's alive." Shadows in the dark upstairs, Ethan, Victor, and Dr. Avery explored the dimly lit hallway. The doors on either side were closed, and the air was heavy with the smell of mildew. Victor paused in front of one door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "Do we open it?" he asked, glancing at the others. Ethan nodded, his curiosity piqued. "We have to know what's inside." Victor turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open with a creak. The room beyond was small and sparse, with a single bed against the wall and a cracked mirror hanging above a dusty dresser. But what caught their attention was the figure sitting on the bed. A little girl, no older than 7, sat with her back to them, her dark hair falling over her face. She wore a tattered white dress, her bare feet dangling above the floor. Victor's breath caught in his throat. "Are you okay?" he asked cautiously, stepping into the room. The girl didn't respond. She didn't move. Dr. Avery stepped forward, his professional instincts taking over. "Let me handle this," he said, his voice calm and soothing. "We don't want to scare her." But as he reached out to touch her shoulder, the girl suddenly turned, her eyes wide and empty, her mouth twisted into a silent scream. The air in the room dropped to freezing, and the lights flickered. The men stumbled back in shock as the girl's form wavered and dissolved into mist, leaving the bed empty. The mirror cracked loudly, spiderwebs of glass spreading across its surface. "What the hell was that?" Ethan gasped, his heart pounding. "A warning," Dr. Avery said, his voice gritty. "This house is trying to scare us away." Victor clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "Well, it's going to take more than that." Downstairs, Ava and Maya had barely recovered from the shock of the living room when they heard a sound from the hallway, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. "What now?" Maya whispered, raising her camera again. Ava held up a hand, signaling for silence. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the door at the end of the hall, a door they hadn't noticed before. Without a word, they approached the door, the tapping now a steady thump, as if something or someone was trying to get out. Ava reached for the doorknob, but the moment her fingers touched the cold metal, the door flew open with a deafening bang. Ava and Maya jumped back, but the room beyond was empty. The only thing that stood out was an old, weathered rocking chair in the corner, its wooden frame creaking as it rocked back and forth on its own. "Please tell me you're seeing this," Maya said, her voice shaking. Ava nodded, her eyes fixed on the chair. "It's not just the house. Something else is here with us." As if in response, the chair stopped rocking, and the room fell deathly silent. Then, slowly, the temperature dropped, and their breath became visible in the air. A shadow moved across the wall, tall and menacing, though there was no figure to cast it. Ava's heart raced as she realized what they were dealing with. "We need to find the others," she said, grabbing Maya's arm. "Now." As the storm raged outside, the 5 of them regrouped in the entrance hall, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. It was clear that whatever was in the house wasn't going to let them leave easily. "We need to stick together," Ethan said, trying to sound confident. "There's strength in numbers." Victor nodded, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. We should check the basement. If there's something down there, we need to know. Dr. Avery agreed, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap. Just be careful. This house is playing with our minds. They found the basement door at the end of the hallway, hidden behind a heavy curtain. The door was locked, but Victor didn't hesitate. He kicked it open with a single powerful blow. The air that wafted up from the darkness below was foul, like rotting flesh. Maya gagged, covering her nose with her sleeve. What died down there? Only one way to find out, Ethan said, turning on his flashlight. They descended the creaky wooden steps, the darkness swallowing them whole. The beam of Ethan's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing walls lined with crumbling bricks and mold. The floor was damp, the air thick with the stench of decay. But it wasn't the basement that terrified them. It was what they found in the center of the room. A large, circular symbol had been etched into the concrete floor, surrounded by flickering candles that shouldn't have been burning in such damp conditions. In the middle of the symbol lay an old book, its pages yellowed with age. Ava's eyes widened as she recognized the symbol. This is a summoning circle. Someone was trying to bring something into this world. Or keep something from getting out, Dr. Avery added, his voice tense. Ethan knelt down, careful not to disturb the circle. We need to figure out what this is and why it's here. Maybe it can help us understand what's happening. But before anyone could respond, a low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, vibrating through the walls. The temperature dropped further, and the candles flickered violently. We're not alone down here, Victor said, his voice barely a whisper. Then, from the shadows, something moved, a dark, hulking shape that seemed to shift and change as it approached. The growling grew louder, more menacing, and the group froze, fear paralyzing them. The entity lunged, and the basement was plunged into chaos. The basement was a maelstrom of chaos. The entity moved with unnatural speed, its shadowy form lunging at the group with an intensity that sent them scrambling in every direction. Ethan's flashlight flickered wildly, casting disjointed beams of light that only heightened their sense of panic. Victor was the first to react, his military instincts kicking in. He grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor, swinging it at the approaching shadow. The pipe passed through the entity as if it were smoke, but the force of the swing sent Victor stumbling backward into the summoning circle. Get away from it, Dr. Avery shouted, trying to pull Victor out of the circle. But as soon as Victor's foot touched the etched symbol, the candles flared up, their flames turning a sickly green. Ava's eyes widened in horror. The circle, it's activating. We need to break it before. Before she could finish, the entity let out a deafening roar, the sound vibrating through the very bones of the house. The floor beneath Victor began to crack, fissures spreading out from the circle as if the earth itself was opening up to swallow him whole. Maya screamed, dropping her camera as the ground beneath her feet shook violently. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the stairs. We have to get out of here. Now! But the entity wasn't finished. It surged forward, its shape shifting and coalescing into something more solid, more terrifying. A grotesque, twisted figure with elongated limbs and a face that seemed to melt and reform with every second. It reached out, clawed hands grasping at Victor as he struggled to free himself from the circle's grip. Help me! Victor shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the entity and the crumbling of the basement floor. Ava, desperate to save him, reached for the book in the center of the circle. She didn't know what it was or how to use it, but something told her it was the key. Her fingers brushed the worn cover, and for a moment, everything went silent. The entity paused, as if sensing what she was about to do. But before she could open the book, the ground beneath Victor gave way, and he was dragged down into the darkness below, his screams echoing in the confined space. The entity let out a triumphant howl, its form dissolving back into shadow as it followed Victor into the abyss. The basement fell silent once more, the only sound a distant rumble of thunder from above. The candles flickered out, plunging them into darkness. Victor! Ethan's voice cracked as he called out, but there was no response. Just the oppressive silence of the house, as if it were satisfied with the sacrifice it had just claimed. We need to get out of here, Maya whispered, her voice trembling. We We can't stay here. Ava held the book tightly, her knuckles white. We can't leave, she said, her voice steely. Not yet. We have to stop whatever this is, or Victor's death will be just the beginning. Dr. Avery nodded, though his face was pale. She's right. This house, it's feeding off our fear, our pain. We have to find a way to end this. With heavy hearts and shaken resolve, the group made their way back upstairs, leaving the basement and Victor's fate behind. The storm raged outside with renewed fury as the group reconvened in the dimly lit living room. The fire in the hearth had long since died out, leaving the room cold and unwelcoming. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air, each of them grappling with the loss in their own way. Ethan paced back and forth, his mind racing. There has to be a reason we were all brought here, he said, more to himself than to the others. This house, it's not just a random haunted place. It wants something from us. Ava, still clutching the book she had taken from the basement, nodded. This book, I think it's connected to whatever's haunting this place. There's something written inside, but it's in a language I don't understand. Dr. Avery took the book from her, flipping through the brittle pages. His brow furrowed as he scanned the ancient script. These are incantations, he murmured. Spells, rituals. This isn't just a haunted house. It's a prison, and something inside is trying to break free. Maya looked up from where she sat, her face pale. So, what do we do? How do we stop it? We need to find out more about the house's history, Ethan said, his mind already formulating a plan. There has to be something in here that can tell us why it's cursed, why it's after us. Dr. Avery hesitated. And what about Victor? We can't just leave him down there. Ava's eyes were distant, haunted. Victor is gone, she said softly. Whatever took him, it's not going to give him back. Not unless we stop it. Ethan clenched his fists, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Then we stop it, he said, determination hardening his voice. We find out what this house wants, and we end it. For Victor. The others nodded, though the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They were in over their heads, but there was no turning back now. The house had claimed one of them, and it wouldn't stop until it had them all, unless they fought back. The group split up to search the house, hoping to find any clues that might shed light on its dark past. Ethan and Ava headed to the library, a grand room filled with dusty books and ancient tomes. The walls were lined with shelves, and the air was thick with the smell of old paper and leather. Ethan ran his fingers along the spines of the books, his eyes scanning the titles. There has to be something here, he muttered, pulling out a particularly old volume. Ava, meanwhile, was drawn to a large, ornate desk in the corner of the room. The surface was cluttered with papers, all yellowed with age. She picked up one of the sheets, her eyes widening as she read the words scrawled across it. Ethan, look at this, she called out, handing him the paper. Ethan took it, his brow furrowing as he read. It was a letter, dated over a century ago, from a man named Jonathan Hollow, one of the house's original owners. The letter spoke of strange occurrences, of visions and nightmares that plagued the family. But most disturbingly, it mentioned a ritual, one designed to trap a malevolent spirit within the house. This is it, Ethan said, his voice low. This is what we've been looking for. The house was used to contain something evil. Ava nodded, her mind racing. But if the spirit was trapped, how did it get loose? What changed? Before Ethan could answer, they heard a crash from somewhere in the house, followed by a scream. It was Maya. They exchanged a look of alarm before rushing out of the library, their hearts pounding as they followed the sound of Maya's voice. Maya was in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. The camera she had been carrying was shattered on the floor, its lens cracked and useless. What happened? Ethan demanded as he reached her, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of danger. Maya pointed a trembling finger toward the end of the hallway. There was something there, she whispered, her voice shaking. A man. He was just standing there, watching me. But he wasn't real. Ava moved closer, her eyes narrowing as she tried to see what Maya had seen. The hallway was empty now, but the air was thick with tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Did he say anything? Ava asked gently, trying to keep Maya calm. Maya shook her head. No, but he looked like he was trying to warn me about something. And then he just vanished. Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Ava. "The house is messing with us," he said, his voice grim. "It's trying to break us down, make us afraid." Ava nodded. "But it's more than that. The spirits here, they're trapped, just like the entity in the basement. They're trying to tell us something." Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "What do we do now? We can't stay here." "We're close to figuring this out," Ethan said, trying to sound confident. "We just need to stay focused. We're not going to let this house win." But even as he said the words, he could feel the house closing in around them, its malevolent presence growing stronger with every passing moment. Back in the library, Dr. Avery had been searching the shelves on his own, his hands trembling as he pulled out an old, leather-bound journal. The name on the cover was familiar, Jonathan Hollow, the same man who had written the letter Ethan and Ava had found. Dr. Avery sat down at the desk, carefully opening the journal. The pages were filled with notes, sketches, and entries that detailed Hollow's descent into madness. The man had been obsessed with the entity, convinced that it was the source of his family's misfortune. The more Dr. Avery read, the more he realized that Hollow had been right. The journal detailed how Hollow had performed a ritual to trap the entity within the house, using the lives of his own family as a sacrifice. The final entry was the most chilling, a warning to anyone who might find the journal. "Beware," it read. "The house will claim you. It feeds on fear, on suffering. The entity is eternal. It cannot be destroyed, only contained. But should it ever be released, it will consume all who enter these walls." Dr. Avery felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a living, breathing thing, feeding on the souls of those who dared to enter. He knew they were running out of time. The house wanted them, just as it had wanted the Hollow family. And unless they could find a way to rebind the entity, they would all suffer the same fate. As Dr. Avery rushed to find the others, the house seemed to come alive around him. The walls creaked and groaned, the air thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. He found Ethan and Ava in the living room, the letter and the journal spread out on the table before them. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Avery said urgently. "The entity, it's growing stronger. The house is feeding it." Ethan looked up, his face pale. "We can't leave. Not yet. We have to stop it." Dr. Avery shook his head. "You don't understand. The entity can't be stopped. It can only be contained. The ritual Hollow performed, it required a sacrifice. That's why the house is after us. It needs another soul to take Hollow's place." Ava's eyes widened in horror. "You mean one of us has to die?" Dr. Avery nodded grimly. "It's the only way to save the rest of us. The house won't let us go until it gets what it wants." Maya, who had been listening from the doorway, backed away, her eyes filled with fear. No, there has to be another way. We can't just sacrifice someone." Ethan's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. But the truth was undeniable. The house was alive, and it wanted blood. As the group struggled with the impossible choice before them, the house seemed to grow darker, its malevolent presence pressing in on them from all sides. The entity was waiting, hungry for its next victim. The storm outside had reached its peak, lightning flashing and thunder shaking the very foundations of the house. The group was gathered in the living room, the journal and letter spread out before them, their faces pale as they faced the grim reality of their situation. Ethan stood up, his jaw set with determination. "We're not going to let this house win. We're going to end this, here and now." Dr. Avery shook his head. "How? The entity is too powerful. You can't destroy it, only contain it, and that requires a sacrifice." Ava looked at the others, her heart heavy. Maybe we can trick it. If the entity thinks it's getting what it wants, maybe it'll release us." Maya's eyes widened. "You mean fake the sacrifice?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance. We just have to make the entity believe we're giving it what it wants." Dr. Avery hesitated, but then nodded in agreement. "It's a long shot, but it could work. We just have to be convincing." The group began to prepare, using the information from the journal and the letter to recreate the ritual. They gathered candles, chalk, and anything else they could find that might help. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with the weight of what they were about to attempt. As they set up the ritual in the living room, the house seemed to grow even darker, the shadows deepening and the air growing colder. The entity was watching, waiting for its prize. Ethan stood in the center of the room, holding a knife he had found in the kitchen. The others formed a circle around him, their faces pale and their hands trembling. They began to chant the words from the journal, their voices shaky but determined. The room grew colder, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. The entity's presence was almost tangible, a dark, oppressive force that seemed to press down on them from all sides. As the ritual reached its climax, Ethan raised the knife, his hand shaking. The others held their breath, their eyes locked on him. And then, with a sudden, swift motion, Ethan plunged the knife into his own arm, the blade slicing through flesh and muscle. Blood flowed freely, pooling on the floor as the others gasped in shock. But Ethan didn't falter. He continued the chant, his voice growing stronger as the pain surged through him. The entity seemed to waver, its presence flickering like a dying flame. The house groaned, the walls creaking as if in protest. The shadows deepened, and for a moment it seemed as if the entity was about to consume them all. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the ritual ended. The air grew still, the oppressive force lifting as the entity's presence faded away. The house was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the group as they stood there, stunned by what had just happened. Ethan slumped to the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. The others rushed to his side, their faces pale with fear and relief. "Did it work?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Avery checked Ethan's wound, his hands shaking. I think it did. The entity is gone, for now at least." Ava looked around the room, her heart still pounding. "We need to get out of here, before it comes back." The group didn't need any more convincing. They gathered their things and made their way to the front door, their steps quick and their hearts heavy. As they stepped out into the storm, the house seemed to watch them, its dark windows like eyes that followed their every move. But they didn't look back. They just kept moving, determined to leave the nightmare behind them. The group hurried down the path leading away from the house, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they fought to put as much distance between themselves and the cursed building as possible. The rain pelted down, soaking them to the bone. They didn't care. They were free. Ethan stumbled, his injured arm throbbing with pain, but Ava was there to support him. "We're almost there," she said, her voice firm despite the fear still gnawing at her. Maya and Dr. Avery led the way, their eyes scanning the dark woods for any sign of danger. The storm had turned the path into a muddy mess, but they pushed on, driven by the desperate need to escape. As they reached the edge of the property, the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on them since they entered the house began to lift. The air felt lighter, the darkness less suffocating. "We made it," Maya whispered, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and relief. Dr. Avery nodded, though his expression remained grim. "We may have escaped, but the house is still out there. The entity is still trapped inside, waiting for its next victims." Ethan looked back at the house, now barely visible through the trees and rain. "We need to make sure no one ever goes back there. We can't let anyone else fall into its trap." Ava squeezed his hand. "We will, but for now, let's just focus on getting out of here." The group continued down the path, the house finally disappearing from view. They didn't speak, each of them lost in their own thoughts as they processed what they had just survived. But even as they left the cursed house behind, a lingering sense of unease remained. The house might have let them go, but they knew it wasn't truly over. Somewhere, deep within its dark, twisted walls, the entity waited, and it wouldn't rest until it was free again. Days later, the group gathered at a small cafe in town, far away from the house and its cursed influence. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun was shining for the first time in what felt like forever. Ethan's arm was bandaged, the wound from the ritual healing slowly, but the scars from their experience ran much deeper than that. Maya stirred her coffee absently, her mind elsewhere. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice quiet. Dr. Avery shook his head. "No, the entity is still there, trapped in that house. But as long as no one disturbs it, it should remain contained." Ava looked at the others, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to make sure that house is sealed off, that no one can ever go back there. We owe it to Victor, and to anyone else who might stumble across it. Ethan nodded. Agreed. We'll do whatever it takes to keep that place hidden. They all knew it wouldn't be easy. The house had a way of drawing people in, of feeding off their fears and desires, but they were determined to stop it. As they sat there, the weight of their experience hanging over them, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The entity might have been contained, but it was far from defeated, and they knew deep down that it was only a matter of time before it found a way to break free again. But for now they had survived, and that was enough. The storm had passed, leaving the old mansion shrouded in a mist that clung to the ground like a ghostly veil. The windows were dark, the doors locked tight, but the house was far from empty. Deep within its walls, the entity stirred, its rage simmering beneath the surface. It had been so close to freedom, so close to escaping the prison that had held it for so long. But the intruders had outsmarted it, tricking it into believing it had won. And now it was forced to wait, biding its time until the next group of unsuspecting souls found their way inside. The house was patient. It had waited for centuries, and it could wait for centuries more. It knew that eventually someone would come, and when they did, the entity would be ready. The house would welcome them with open arms, luring them into its dark embrace. And once they were inside, it would never let them go. The entity smiled, a cruel, twisted grin that spread across its shadowy face. The house was alive, and it was hungry, and it wouldn't rest until it had claimed them all.